Video 11, a conversation with Henry Kissinger, 30 minutes. It's basically historical perspectives on war. Graham Allison, an elderly Harvard graduate, talks with Henry Kissinger, who is now 99 years old. They talk about Ukraine, NATO having a ceasefire, and importantly, dialogue and later peace negotiations. Kissinger thinks Russia should be given an opportunity to rejoin the world. In the past, he seems to have had concerns about Ukraine joining NATO before the war because it might have led to exactly what happened. He supports the Ukrainians and thinks they are brave. Regarding China and Taiwan, Kissinger, with Nixon, put through proposals about Taiwan about 50 years ago, but neither side agreed on the direction for Taiwan. America and China have to be careful moving forward because each side has big weapons and both countries need to continue negotiations and peace talks, and China should restrain its military build-up around Taiwan. There's a bit of history about Kissinger and Harvard and groups that emerged last century, but that's too big a tangent to go on here. Might do a separate video. Video number 12, India's road to a $10 trillion economy, 50 minutes. This is basically a panel of Indians talking about how great India is. India, interestingly, didn't just hand out tons of money to everyone during the pandemic, so they don't have the high inflation problems that were guaranteed for countries that just handed out tons of money, such as Australia. Instead, they supported the vulnerable and put tons of money into developing infrastructure. They drastically improved internal supply chains as well. They're doing an AI transition, energy transition, and supply chain transition. They have various schemes to attract investors and want to take over China in being the world's workforce and supplier of certain goods, especially in tech and telecommunications. Apple seems to be shifting to India, such as Foxconn in China, which is 250,000 people strong in China. That's where they had some of the protests. Probably all dead now. A lot of energy now comes from green hydrogen. They really want to become a major exporter. Healthcare is going to be big business. They want a lot of tourism and are setting up about 26 airports. India wants to attract supply chain participants to become a resilient supplier. No mention of all the other things that happened during the pandemic response, such as certain drugs being introduced in certain places and just the cases disappearing. No mention of the huge number of child slaves there, or that government data showed that over 90% of COVID deaths were from comorbidities. And let's not forget that asthma is a huge comorbidity problem in India. Video 13, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of United Nations, 36-minute video. Doom, doom, doom. Women are suffering the most. Poor people are suffering. We are not ready for the pandemics to come. Climate disaster is upon us. 1.5 degrees global warming is now going to be 2.8 degrees. The science is in, apparently. Fossil fuel producers must be held to account. We are doomed. The war in Ukraine will go on for some time, and more doom and gloom. All the doom and gloom is interlinked, and we need drastic solutions. We can't have two blocks of economic superpowers, East and West, China and other places. Rich countries need to do more for poorer countries. Poor countries need lots of loans to achieve climate action. The new green economy needs to be supercharged, and everyone needs to submit plans for net zero by the end of the year. The private sector must do more. Government action is not enough. Governments need to do more for the private sector so they can all transition to the green economy. We need vaccine equity for persons of different colour, and women need a hand up. Multilateral organisations such as WHO and the UN will be key. Then there's more stuff on taking decisions to stop the world from warming, and we need incentives to create the right kind of thinkers for our new society. Social media is not helping as it creates more trouble, and algorithms need to be redesigned so that evil does not make a profit. We are in the worst time of Antonio's life. We are at the point of no return on climate change catastrophe. Quote, "The confrontations today are more dangerous than previous wars because there are less mechanisms to ensure that we do not get out of control. Seems like the brief that went to all speakers is that they have to talk about climate change, the green industrial revolution, Ukraine, and equity stuff. Video 14, Olaf Scholz, Federal Chancellor of Germany, 39 minutes. Starts with the green economy being key and Ukraine war is bad. Supply chains are important, decoupling is bad. Everyone is saying decoupling is bad, by the way. Germany threw $12 billion at Ukraine last year and will support Ukraine ongoing. A notable quote, in Berlin, we worked with international experts to draw up a Marshall Plan for the long-term reconstruction of Ukraine. The quote continues, a platform of major donors is coordinating the process and in consultation with Ukraine, ensuring it is well implemented. Private sector capital will play a key role. Germany is supplying large quantities of arms to Ukraine. Within months, Germany made itself independent of Russian gas, oil and coal. Germany is going absolutely gung-ho on transitioning to green energy because of the war and are doing heaps of things to transition. Germany will be at 80% green energy by 2030. New laws on implementing green power is taking first place because it takes too long otherwise. Germany has some various patents for hydrogen production. Quote, energy must remain affordable in Germany, Europe and worldwide, because it certainly isn't, which is why energy prices are going through the solar panelled roof around the world. Their solution is to interfere with the market by capping prices. They've invested 2% GDP to secure investments and build stuff. So taxpayers will pay for everything whether they like it or not, to the point of 400 billion euros. Germany launched an international climate club with G7, which is basically trade agreements with certain countries going green and punishing countries that aren't in the club. In America, this ambition has a name called the Inflation Reduction Act. This act, we remember, actually has $330 billion earmarked for green energy transition over the next 10 years. Basically transferring tax money into business or big business. Germany has made $180 billion available for the next 3 years for energy transformation. Funding is there for investors, national and international, to invest in Germany, so a company might get billions of dollars to build something that aligns with the green industrial revolution, and it seems like you don't even have to completely align with it, but as long as your factory uses green power. A short quote, the funding is there for the taking. So German taxpayers will offset billionaire industries, basically. Billions is going to Siemens to connect an offshore wind park to the grid. Politics, private business and trade unions are working hand in hand in Germany. Sounds truly utopian. Only 20% of the 700 billion European Recovery Fund post-COVID overreach has been paid out. Legislation will be more relaxed so that investors can get the money sooner. A notable quote, my successor will address you at the World Economic Forum in 2045. He or she will present Germany as one of the first climate-neutral industrial nations. Germany will this year benefit from modern immigration legislation. The goal is to improve the workforce of mechanics, engineers and tradesmen. He's proud that the German population has grown. However, if you read Douglas Murray's Strange Death of Europe, mass migration isn't working out so well for Europe. A guy in the audience is from Ukraine and wants heavy tanks from Germany. Olaf says that they are delivering highly effective weapons as they can and will be delivering more for as long as necessary. His takeaway message is invest in Germany because they are whores for the new green economy. Video 15, a conversation with the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, 31 minutes. Olena, married to Zelensky, launched the Olena Zelenska Foundation last year to basically ask for money to go towards healthcare, education and humanitarian aid. Russia is ruining Ukraine's infrastructure, including healthcare infrastructure. Electricity is a big problem. Food supplies are a problem. Sounds like investors are rebuilding some hospitals and healthcare places already. Schools are being shelled, so students are studying online as they did during lockdown. A couple of heartstring stories about teachers still teaching. You can donate to various projects via the Foundation's website and can even visit the country to see how your money is being spent. A lot of people seem to be visiting Ukraine, by the way. Elena had a meeting with a bunch of CEOs attending Davos who are going to support Ukraine. She probably told them the same thing which she says next, which is, quote, reconstruction in Ukraine is not just going back to how it was before. We need to rebuild better than in the past. Build back better. And in fact, this renewal, it will mean a profound change in a more profound sense. And I'm really inspired by what I see here today because I can see a lot of potential partners who are planning to help us already implementing important projects, end quote. Interestingly, Ukrainian children were brought to Russia and adopted by force. No dialogue with Russia on this issue. Russia are returning some, but it's a slow process. Sounds pretty bad actually, and the result of war, and the children will be lost in the fog. Video 16 is a special address by Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine. 21 minutes. A bloke introduces Zelensky by saying dictionaries of the future will show a picture of Zelensky for the definition of courage. Zelensky talks about a recent helicopter crash where the Minister of Internal Affairs and his colleagues died. The helicopter crashed into a kindergarten and children died there as well. I might point out that the crash was just a big old accident and nothing to do with the Russians. Zelensky then does a minute of silence and everyone in the audience stands. He then goes on about global crises, including environmental, food, energy, and how the world cannot continue down the current path. There is a new crisis, a time crisis. Tyranny is outpacing democracy. Europe did the right thing by opening its borders to Ukrainians within days. He says the Green Deal is good and there will be unity around energy. Apparently the world can be saved by quick, massive decisions. He says that, quote, Russia is exporting terror, and that, quote, Russia is spreading the strain of war around the world. Some pandemic lingo there. Ukraine offers the world a peace formula, or Zelensky apparently does. The 10 steps will help the world respond faster to Russia's next moves. There are zero peace talks with Russia from Zelensky, by the way. Instead, he says the, quote, mobilization of the world must outpace the next military mobilization of our joint enemy, end quote. Ukraine must be supplied with more military equipment, missiles, air defense missiles, Western tanks. Quote, the restoration of security and peace in Ukraine must outpace Russia's attacks on security and peace in other countries, end quote. Zelensky says we need a tribunal for military crimes. NATO needs to be expanded, and so does the European Union to, quote, stop the spread of Russian aggression. Zelensky said his first time at the World Economic Forum was 3 years ago. It was the time when the world fought and won against the COVID-19 enemy. Now the world is fighting against Putin. In 3 years' time, Ukraine will be overcoming new challenges and threats in Davos. The world overcame Nazism, apartheid, pandemics, the indifference to climate change, financial crisis, and the Kremlin strain. The world will overcome again. Long live Ukraine, and a round of applause from the audience. I might point out that Zelensky was formerly an actor. Zelensky thanks other countries for paying their budget deficit, which is continuing to grow, and thanks them for new energy systems being installed. The guy now talking to Zelensky, the MC, reminds us that Kissinger said that there needs to be peace talks and dialogue with Russia and asks what Zelensky's view on this is. Zelensky says Russia has already earned a place among terrorists and everyone, leaders and NATO, needs to support Ukraine to get peace for as long as it takes. Zelensky just wants more ammunition to find peace. He talks about missiles striking civilians, but doesn't mention that military are using civilian areas. Video 17, Restoring Security and Peace, 49 minutes. It's another panel. Security General of NATO is there, President Duda of Poland, Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, the Canadian Finance Minister and Director of National Intelligence from America, Avril Haines. I've certainly seen Avril's face before, as she was an Event 201 participant. The MC congratulates American intelligence for seeing the war happening before it happened. American intelligence, Avril Haines, says Ukraine needs military and economic assistance. America is providing heaps of stuff for Ukraine. Ukraine has to win to send a message to the world and other countries. Otherwise, China might start saber-rattling, threatening other countries with nuclear weapons. She chimes in a few times throughout the 40 minutes, but it's hard to follow her train of thought. The MC says Putin is going to crush civilians in Ukraine, and then we hear from the Deputy Minister of Ukraine. Ukraine must keep going. People need to invest in Ukraine, especially in education. Ukraine needs support for military and also on an economic front. The World Bank estimated in September that Ukraine needs $350 billion US. But she says it needs to now be $1 trillion to get a victory in the next year. When Ukraine wins the war, they will ask for more finance to rebuild. Duda, Poland's president, asked the audience to clap for the First Lady of Ukraine, who's in the audience. He says Ukraine needs modern weapons, but weapons are maybe not enough, and Poland will supply lots of stuff. Poland has taken 2 million refugees from Ukraine and are proud of that. Zelensky told Duda in a private meeting he needs a guarantee that Ukraine can join NATO. Duda came from a right-wing party and is an independent president. He rejected the idea of mass migration of refugees from North African countries years ago. He then signed Poland up to China's Belt and Road Initiative, and he's pretty conservative when it comes to LGBT issues. The Canadian Finance Minister says basically Ukraine is teaching us all the true strength of democracy. Supply Ukraine with weapons and funds and Ukraine can win, and this will boost the world economy. The NATO guy is saying that he's going around to all the NATO countries getting more weapons and military for Ukraine so that they can win. Putin can't win, he says. A notable quote, "Weapons are the way to peace." Weapons, he says, will make Putin negotiate. We have to prove democracy wins over tyranny with weapons. Interestingly, he says Putin attempted a treaty with NATO previously and outlined some key demands weeks before Russian forces went into Ukraine. One was that no more countries join NATO to avoid further enlargement of NATO. The other main demand was to remove all NATO forces' infrastructure in all the allied countries that have joined NATO after 1997, which are basically the eastern part of the alliance, countries that are close to Russia. NATO rejected this treaty. Basically, NATO wants to get stronger, and this concerns Russia. Although contentious, perhaps an easy way to think of this is if China was making allies in countries and islands surrounding Australia, and this would be rather concerning to Australians. The NATO guy says the increased military presence in eastern NATO areas before the war was just to prevent conflict and not stoke conflict. Although you could see how that would stoke conflict. He goes on to say that Putin wanted less NATO, but is actually getting more NATO because Sweden and Finland are now joining. Video 18, Keeping the Pace on Climate. CNN Business or something, it's 65 minutes long. The lovely young Englishwoman reminds everyone that prior at Davos, everyone learned that the house is on fire. The MC starts with climate change doom and gloom. Apparently 2022 was the hottest year on record. It took a war in Ukraine, raging inflation, and a dramatic energy security crisis and fear to kickstart the green revolution. But we need money, 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 $4 trillion a year. We also need indigenous knowledge. She asks, how do we decarbonise the oil and gas sector faster? A speaker there, Helena Golingwa, co-founder of the Indigenous Youth Collective of Amazon Defenders, says we are not on pace for climate action. Indigenous peoples have been on the front line. She wants to keep all fossil fuels underground. She's about 20 years old. It's all gotten worse in the last couple of years. She's mates with Greta Thunberg, and together they wrote a letter to give to oil CEOs at Davos to phase out fossil fuels. Secretary John Kerry is there. He's special presidential envoy for climate in the United States. He says globally we're heading towards 2.5 degrees global warming. We have to get spending up to about 4.5 trillion every year for the next 30 years. We need to be deploying the largest solar fields in the world every day for years to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This guy's off his nuts. Renewables need to be deployed 6 times faster than they are today. Red tape is slowing all this down. Quote, our enemy are emissions, end quote. Kerry has come up with some kind of pie-in-the-sky way that the industry can actually produce a profit. The private sector has to be incentivised. Sounds like it requires a lot of taxpayer dollars. Quote, this is going to be the biggest transformation economically since the Industrial Revolution, end quote. Jennifer Morgan's on the panel. She's Special Envoy for International Climate Action in Germany. She says we need to pressure those who aren't going in the right direction with the decisions that need to be made. Permitting needs to change from 7 years to 2 years for renewable projects, and in German law, the reason is to save youth by putting them all in long-term debt, of course. Then there's Anna Avok, I think her name is, President and Chief Executive Officer of Vattenfall. She wants fossil fuel-free living in 1 generation, and her business is doing that. Her company is making fossil-free steel and zero-carbon fuel for planes. There's too much red tape in setting up investments and infrastructure, so this needs to all go. Then there's Jesper Bruden on the panel, CEO of Inca Group. And he's been part of World Economic Forum Climate Alliance for several years now. He thinks 1.5 degrees is the planetary limit for global warming. We are racing against the clock because of the ignorance of previous generations. But we are on the right track, and we have the medicine to make things better. People who don't jump on the climate train will be left behind. Basically, everyone on the panel and pretty much everyone at Davos loves the Paris Agreement. All the rich countries need to support the poor countries, and it will be a collective effort to fix the world. That worked so well last century. Video 19, a conversation with Idris Elba and Sabrina Dori Elba, 36 minutes. A random Londoner is interviewing this actor who's from London and his wife, who's originally from an African country. He's mortified by the disparity of wealth and mortified about what we're doing to the planet. His wife, who is there with him, identifies as a person of colour. They really admire Ben & Jerry's for their business ethics. BJ's have basically asked everyone to buy ice cream to stop climate change and are inclusive of all made-up genders. The actor and his wife are working on getting some Africans away from handouts and developing small farming solutions through EFAT, which sounds good. But they believe farmers are losing stock, and all the droughts and floods is because of man-made climate change. Smallholder farming is very important to people in Africa and needs to be made cool again. Investment is needed, and investment can be successful. A good point is made about the rather evil cacao industry, but it was very passing. Video 20, Ukraine, what's next? 48 minutes. On the panel we have Oleksiy Shinoshov, CEO of Nafta Gas in Ukraine. He basically says the war gives a reason to go into a new decarbonised energy system, and there isn't much electricity in Kiev right now. He says Ukraine needs people to invest in energy in Ukraine, and they need to fight the internal enemy of corruption, corporate governance issues, and judicial reform is needed to bring in investments. Then we have Yulia Sevendenko, First Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine and Minister of Economy. She basically says Ukraine will win the war provided they get more weapons, and Zelensky has a 10-step plan for a peaceful formula, but some other countries need to take care of some of the steps, which include providing weapons. She wants people to invest in Ukraine, and reform is making this possible. As soon as Ukraine wins the war, this will be a mecca for investment, on day 2 even, she says. Government grants will help businesses enlarge so that the unemployed Ukrainians can work, and so workers and businesses stay in Ukraine. On the panel also is Odile Francois Renard Bassot, President for European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. They've invested 1.7 billion euros and 200 million more is coming from partner banks. So the more that is done now to win the war means less money is required later for reconstruction. 450 million has gone into financing essential gas, food production in the private sector and other bits and pieces. Although interestingly, apparently everything is continuing to function in Ukraine and paying back loans will be given extra time because they are at war. G7 countries will all work together to make sure Ukraine has the best reconstruction efforts. On the panel is Vil Skanari, Minister for Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade in Finland. He visited Ukraine just a week ago. Finland has helped with some energy supplies in Ukraine. Finland is doing their bit to help Ukraine. Then there's George Kukis, State Secretary, Federal Chancellery of Germany. The G7 imposed sanctions on Russia in record time to strangle their efforts to pay for war efforts. Video 21, we go to Korea with the President of the Republic of Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol. 27 minutes. Klaus says he met Yoon right after he became a president and invited him to the World Economic Forum. Public-private cooperation is the key to the World Economic Forum, says Klaus, and Korea is now doing a better job of that. Yoon says the WEF creates more freedom around the world. The supply chain has been fragmented and Russia exacerbated this. There's climate change recognitions. To overcome challenges, we need to cooperate more and strengthen solidarity. Businesses and governments need to cooperate more. Free trade is good. Low carbon economy is good. Resilient supply chains are needed. He wants to see, quote, a digital order contributing to freedom and the prosperity for all. There is great divide in the digital era, which is the new challenge for humanity. He says the solution is to build a global digital order so digital technologies can help global citizens expand their freedom. Korea will create the Digital Bill of Rights in Korea, which can contribute to the establishment of a digital order in the world. Basically, everyone should have equal access to new digital technologies. Korea will produce a digital platform government that marries government-owned data and private sector services based on the private sector's creative ideas as well as innovative technologies in AI, cloud computing and other things to build an effective safety social net. That one needs some investigating perhaps. Korea is leading in technology on semiconductor rechargeable batteries and biotechnology. He says semiconductors are the future of the energy and everything really. Overcoming the climate crisis has become a common agenda and it's good everyone is working towards achieving their net zero targets. Korea will interestingly be working on nuclear power and clean hydrogen. They will expand their nuclear power production and share their nuclear power technologies with other countries. Good. They will boost their vaccine production capacity and become better at responding to pandemics and help other countries to respond better. Klaus then says his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, sold best in Korea and he loves the public-private cooperation happening in Korea. Video 22, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, 33 minutes. Basically, AI is growing and developing. ChatGPT is the new big thing. The metaverse will help in the global collaboration village where roughly 80 companies are currently involved. When Klaus asks him about cybersecurity, they've developed zero trust architecture security. They see trillions of signals, computer signals, and were able to see the Ukraine war before it started and evacuated the Ukrainian government into the cloud. Don't know how that works. Microsoft want to be carbon negative by 2050 because they are correcting their sins of the past. Klaus asks what other companies can do to achieve decarbonisation. Satya says they've launched the Cloud for Sustainability, which is for carbon accounting. It's a software system for any business, and banks will be able to look at their carbon footprints before giving any credit to companies. God. Supercomputers may soon be able to compress 250 years of chemistry into computational chemistry and perhaps try and discover new molecules that will help with new global energy transition processes. Klaus asks if a new tech business is required because less people are needed in the workforce. He keeps clarifying his point to get to a question, quote, "So what are the new talents and required skills moving forward?" End quote. Satya talks about AI and the metaverse helping spread skills across the world equitably, because we need more skills in education. Klaus then talks about the global collaboration village again and how they are working on different ideas, and I think finally we get a hint of where Klaus has been heading over the whole of Davos, because he has brought emphasis to new skills and training and education several times. Quote, "The metaverse will be a tremendous, will provide us with new capabilities, particularly in education. AI and the metaverse combined, along with something called a co-pilot, will help students diagnose and understand their mistakes as they are making them and help them overcome these mistakes." Klaus says, "I think one of the reasons why, let's say, Susanna's meeting is a success is not only working together, but it's the serendipity effect. But if you do it in the virtual world, let's say again in the global collaboration village, you can build in the serendipity with artificial intelligence into the system so you know exactly who is the best in order to help you to solve your own problem." End quote. Satya then says one of his favourite features is one of the products we've recently built is whenever you want to research a topic, it doesn't just tell you the answer to the topic, but it tells you the people that you should connect with, that ability to know whom to talk to and to learn more. Okay, so it sounds like this is a potential new or updated way of education. Obviously, it could be very beneficial in a number of ways. However, like the Australian curriculum, which was introduced by a Fabian and now consists of all the postmodern indoctrination language for Aussie kids, Klaus sounds like he is hinting at having the right kind of global education. From everything we've heard about the climate change propaganda at Davos, being educated in this way means that kids would only ever see what the AI and metaverse wants them to see and will only connect them with those who think the correct way about such things as climate change, bioscience, and the list goes on.